In one devastating morning, Vanessa Lawson stood at her mother's grave,
Sorry, it has to be
7
this way.
months pregnant, when her husband humiliated her with divorce papers in front of everyone. But just moments later, everything changed. A shocking inheritance of $500 million revealed a secret plan her late mother had been preparing for months. A plan that would expose betrayal, destroy lies, and turn a broken woman into the mastermind of the most unforgettable revenge. This story reminds us of a powerful lesson. Never underestimate someone who chooses silence over anger, because patience can be the strongest weapon of all. Sometimes life breaks you not to end your story, but to prepare you for a comeback no one saw coming. If this story moved you, please support the channel with one like and one share to help us create more powerful stories like this. Your support means everything. Thanks for watching.
What if you were 7 months pregnant, standing at your mother's grave, when your husband served you with divorce papers right in front of everyone? Now, what if 30 seconds later, you discovered your mother had left you $500 million, and your husband had just thrown it all away? This is the incredible story of Vanessa Lawson. In a single morning, she lost everything, only to be given the power to ruin everyone who had betrayed her. But the most stunning part is that her mother had been planning this entire revenge for 6 months before she died. Every single move, every hidden trap, and every devastating secret was part of the plan. You are about to hear how a grieving woman turned the tables on her cheating husband, his calculating family, and a mistress with a fake pregnancy. You will see her go from sobbing on a bathroom floor to orchestrating the most shocking public downfall that Atlanta had ever seen. And she would prove that the most powerful weapon is not anger, but patience. But I must warn you, this story has 3 massive twists that will leave you absolutely speechless. You will never see the ending coming. If you are a fan of stories about karma, justice, and women who refuse to be victims, then you are in for a treat. Please hit that like button so this story can reach more people. Drop a comment below and let me know if you would have done the same thing Vanessa did. And be sure to subscribe, because I can guarantee you have never heard a tale of vengeance quite like this. Our story begins at the cemetery, where everything changed in an instant. The rain managed to hold back just long enough for Margaret Lawson's casket to be lowered into the Georgia clay. The historic Oakland Cemetery stretched across a large Atlanta hillside. Old oak trees cast long shadows over weathered tombstones that dated back to the Civil War. Around 30 mourners stood in a half circle near the fresh grave, their black attire standing out against the gray November sky. Vanessa Lawson stood at the edge of the group, 7 months pregnant. One hand rested on her swollen belly, while the other clutched a tissue that was torn to shreds. Her face was hollow, worn down by a grief so powerful it seemed to have erased everything else inside her. Then the baby kicked, a little reminder that life continues, even when it feels impossible. The priest's voice droned on, speaking of ashes to ashes and dust to dust. He commended Margaret Lawson to God's eternal keeping. Beside her, David Reynolds checked his phone for the 3rd time in 5 minutes. Vanessa saw it, but chose to say nothing. Her husband of 2 years had been cold and distant for months. But on this day, she desperately needed him to be present. When she reached for his hand, it felt cold and unresponsive in hers. About 30 feet behind them, Linda and Robert Reynolds stood under a black umbrella that was useless since it was not raining. They watched the service with expressions that did not match the serious mood of the event. The corners of Linda's mouth were turned up slightly, not quite a smile, but something close to it, something that looked like satisfaction. In the crowd, Vanessa noticed a woman she barely recognized from David's office. dabbing her eyes with a tissue. Her name was Claudia. She had sent a sympathy card. Her hand rested on her stomach in a gesture Vanessa knew all too well, the unconscious, protective touch of early pregnancy. David's jaw grew tight. He yanked his hand away from Vanessa's and reached into his jacket. The movement was slow and seemed rehearsed. He pulled out a large brown envelope that looked official and threatening. "David," Vanessa whispered, "what is that?" He did not answer. Instead, he turned to face her directly, completely hiding the casket from her view. His eyes were completely empty. There was no warmth, no sign of their shared past, and no acknowledgement of the child growing inside of her. "Vanessa," he said. His voice sliced through the priest's prayer like a blade. Heads turned. The priest paused mid-sentence. A wave of confusion rippled through the mourners. David handed her the envelope, and her hand shook as she took it. What is this?" she asked. "Divorce papers," he said flatly, the words sounding rehearsed. "I have already signed them." The world seemed to tilt beneath her. Vanessa staggered backward, and Sarah Mitchell, her best friend from college, caught her by the elbow. Gasps were heard all around them. Phones started coming out of pockets. Someone even started recording. "What?" Vanessa's voice cracked. "David, what are you talking about?" He looked away from her, toward the line of cars parked beyond the graves. "It is over," he said. "This marriage, us. It is for the best." "Better?" The word came out as a strangled whisper. "My mother is being buried right now. I am pregnant with your baby. You are doing this here?" "I realize the timing is not great," he said, but waiting would only have made it more difficult. A muscle in his face twitched. It was impossible to know if it was guilt or just annoyance. "You are strong, Vanessa. You will figure it out." Strong. He was calling her strong, while he shattered her world at her mother's graveside. Vanessa suddenly felt all the eyes on her. All 30 mourners were staring. Some looked shocked, but others had a darker expression, a mixture of judgment, curiosity, and the awful fascination people have with watching someone else's life fall apart. "Why?" Her voice sounded empty. "Why are you doing this?" David straightened his tie, still avoiding her eyes. "Because I need you to understand that this is final. I am with Claudia now." The name hit her like a punch. She is pregnant. She needs me. Vanessa's knees almost gave out. The coworker, the woman whose texts had lit up his phone at midnight, the one Vanessa had asked about, only to be told she was being paranoid and insecure, that she was imagining things. "You are leaving me while pregnant with your child for another woman who is also pregnant with your child." "It is complicated," he said, shoving his hands into his pockets. He sounded like he was talking about a business deal. "I do not expect you to understand, but Claudia makes me happy. She makes me feel alive." He paused, searching for the words that would hurt the most. "You make me feel trapped." The whispers from the crowd grew louder. Phones were held up higher. This would be all over social media within minutes. In an hour, the world would know that David Reynolds served his pregnant wife. Divorce papers at her mother's funeral. "You are making a mistake," Vanessa said. Her voice had turned cold, harder than she knew she was capable of. "You have no idea what you are doing." David actually smiled, a look that was both pitying and arrogant. "I know exactly what I am doing. I am choosing my own happiness. You should try it sometime." Then he turned and walked away. There was no hug, no apology, and no acknowledgement of their broken vows or the family he was abandoning. His parents greeted him with approving nods, as if he had done something honorable. A man in an expensive suit pushed through the crowd. He was distinguished, probably in his 60s, carrying a briefcase that looked like it cost more than Vanessa's car. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said quietly, "my name is James Morrison. I was your mother's attorney. I need to speak with you immediately. Not now, Vanessa managed to say. Please, I cannot. Your mother left very specific instructions. His voice was urgent, but kind. She said, if anything happened to her, you must know this right now, before anyone else acts. He handed her a sealed envelope. Vanessa recognized her mother's handwriting on the front. It said, "Open immediately." Her hand shook as she tore it open. Inside was a single, official document. The heading was a blur until the numbers came into focus. It was the last will and testament of Margaret Lawson. The total value of the estate was $500 million. The paper slipped from her fingers. David, who was about 20 feet away, turned back. Some instinct made him retrieve the fallen document. His eyes scanned it, and the color completely drained from his face. 500 million. Linda Reynolds rushed over and snatched the paper from his hands. As she read it, her perfect composure shattered. This cannot be real. Margaret was a bookkeeper. I do not understand, Vanessa said, looking at James Morrison. My mother worked for small businesses. She lived in a tiny apartment. She drove a 15-year-old car. Where did this come from? Your mother was a genius, Mrs. Reynolds. James's voice carried across the suddenly silent cemetery. She built an empire in secret, and she built it to protect you. David looked from the paper to Vanessa, and you could see the realization dawning in his eyes. The sheer size of his mistake was finally becoming clear. Wait, Vanessa, we need to talk. I did not know about... Something in Vanessa's expression shifted. She saw him clearly now, perhaps for the very first time. She saw the weakness, the manipulation, and the cruel calculation of what he had done. You want to talk now? Her voice cut like glass. After you just handed me divorce papers at my mother's funeral? I did not know about the money. Desperation crept into his tone. If I had known... If you had known... A new steel-like strength entered her voice for the first time. So, you only want me if I have money? David realized what he had just said. No, that is not what I meant. Vanessa picked up the divorce papers from where they had fallen. She thrust them at him. You wanted me to sign this. Now you sign it. He froze, confused. You want it out, so you are out, and you will never see a single penny of my mother's money. She then turned to the attorney. Make sure of it, whatever it takes. James Morrison allowed himself a slight smile. Your mother already did, ma'am, he said. The prenup his parents insisted on protects your inheritance completely. He has zero claim to it. The look on Linda's face, the moment she realized her own greed had destroyed her son's access to $500 million, was almost beautiful in its horror. Vanessa's voice then carried across the cemetery. My mother's funeral is over. Anyone who wants to pay respects to her memory is welcome to stay. Anyone here for the circus can leave. She turned her back on David, walked to Margaret's casket, and placed her hand on the polished wood. I understand now, Mom, she whispered. Thank you. 3 months earlier, everything had been different. Vanessa and David were at an upscale restaurant for their second anniversary. There was soft lighting, expensive wine for him, and sparkling cider for Vanessa. But she had a feeling that something was wrong beneath the surface. Is everything okay? Vanessa reached for his hand across the table. David's phone buzzed again. He glanced at it. The name on the screen was Claudia. He silenced it without meeting her eyes. Just work stuff. You know how it is. She knew, but she also knew that work did not usually require that kind of secrecy. It was 9 o'clock on a Friday night, 2 weeks later. Vanessa was holding a positive pregnancy test. Her hand trembled with a mix of fear and excitement. She wanted to surprise David. She would replay this moment in her mind later, searching for the warning signs she had missed. His smile did not reach his eyes. His expression showed something other than joy. It looked like panic, or maybe even anger. He said, That is great, honey. Wow. His hug felt mechanical and cold. Over his shoulder, Vanessa felt a seed of doubt begin to grow. That same week, Margaret met David's parents for the first time in her small, neat apartment. She served them tea, but Linda and Robert Reynolds refused to sit down. It was a clear power play. Vanessa saw it, but felt helpless to say anything. Linda's voice was full of false sweetness. She said, Margaret, it is so lovely to finally see where Vanessa grew up. So, cozy. Margaret's reply was pleasant but firm. I believe in living a simple life. It keeps things from getting complicated. Robert looked around the room with a dismissive air. Yes, very simple. After they left, Margaret spoke to Vanessa privately. Something is wrong with that boy. You need to watch him. Vanessa immediately felt defensive. Mom, you do not even know him. He is different when it is just the two of us, Vanessa insisted. But Margaret's eyes held a deep sadness and wisdom from a lifetime of experience. Honey, people do not change who they are. They just show you different sides of themselves. Make sure you know which side you married. The scene at the doctor's office was harsh and cold. Margaret sat facing a doctor who seemed too young to be delivering such terrible news. Stage 4 pancreatic cancer, he said gently. I am so sorry, Margaret. We are looking at 3 to 6 months, maybe less. Margaret took in the information with a strange sense of calm. How long until I cannot handle my own business? You will have good days and bad days, the doctor explained. Perhaps 8 to 12 weeks, where you will feel mostly clear. Margaret nodded. Then I have work to do. The very next day, she met with her lawyer, James Morrison, and a man named Detective Michael Rivera. I need you to investigate my son-in-law, David Reynolds, she said. Something is not right. James shifted uncomfortably in his seat. What makes you say that? Margaret's voice was completely steady. A mother always knows. I see Vanessa's face when she thinks no one is watching. She is not happy. She is afraid of being unhappy. There is a big difference. Detective Rivera leaned in. What should we look for? An affair? Money problems? Look for anything that suggests he plans to leave her, Margaret instructed. Because if he does, I want to be certain that she has everything she needs to fight back. The hospice room had a sharp smell of cleaning supplies and wilting flowers. Margaret was lying in bed. She was very weak, but her mind was clear. Vanessa, now 6 months pregnant, held her mother's hand. There is a key, Margaret said. Her voice was a faint whisper, but it was urgent. It is in my jewelry box. It opens safe deposit box 447 at First Atlanta Bank. Vanessa started to cry. Mom, please do not talk like this. Margaret's grip tightened with surprising strength. Listen to me. Everything you need is in that box. Do not trust anyone until they prove they are worthy. Protect yourself and protect my granddaughter. How do you know it is a girl? Vanessa asked through her tears. Margaret managed a weak smile. A grandmother knows. Promise me, Vanessa. Promise me you will be strong. I promise, Vanessa sobbed. Show them what a Lawson woman is made of. Her mother's breathing became shallow. I love you more than... The heart monitor let out a long, flat tone. That sound would echo in Vanessa's memory for years. She fell onto her mother's chest, her body shaking with grief. Behind her, David stood in the doorway, distracted, looking at his phone. He was barely there, even in this final, heartbreaking moment. The funeral was only 2 days later. Everything Vanessa had worried about, everything her mother had warned her of, was about to happen. It all came crashing down in those awful moments by the grave. After David left her side, after the lawyer read the will, the other mourners quickly disappeared. Some gave her empty words of sympathy that felt more like insults. Others refused to even look at her, as if his betrayal was a disease they could catch. Sarah Mitchell, a close friend still in her nurse's uniform, pushed through the remaining people. She had come straight from the hospital. "What in the world just happened?" she asked. Vanessa could not speak. She could not cry. She could not feel anything but the heavy weight of the baby inside her and a crushing, unbelievable truth. In a single morning, she had lost everything. "I have lost my mother and my marriage," she finally said, her voice hollow. "He left me, just now, standing at my mom's grave." Sarah looked at the legal papers, still in James Morrison's hand. "Is that about the money?" "I do not know, and I do not care," Vanessa whispered, completely numb. "My mother is gone. My marriage is over. I just want to fade away." But fading away was not an option. By the time Sarah drove Vanessa back to the house she had shared with David, it was already too late. Her key no longer worked in the lock. He had changed them. Through the front window, Vanessa could see empty spaces where their furniture used to be. The walls were bare where their photos had once hung. A single piece of paper was taped to the door. "Vanessa, my lawyer will be in touch about our assets. Please do not try to contact me. Remove your personal items by Friday, or they will be thrown away. David." Neighbors watched from their porches, whispering to each other. One woman walked over, her concern fake. "Oh, honey, we saw the moving truck yesterday. Are you two all right?" Vanessa said nothing. She walked back to Sarah's car, holding on to the last bit of her dignity. "I have nowhere to go," she whispered. Sarah's voice was fierce and strong. "Yes, you do. You are coming home with me." Sarah's apartment was tiny and crowded, but it felt safe. Vanessa sat on the pull-out sofa and stared blankly at the wall while Sarah made some tea. The television was on in the background. A local news story was going viral. "Investment banker serves divorce papers at wife's funeral." They were showing shaky phone video from the cemetery. A hashtag, "divorced at funeral," was trending online. The comments were a river of cruelty. She must have done something to deserve that. He looked so finished with her. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. The poor baby is the real victim. Vanessa's phone buzzed nonstop. She had 87 missed calls and more than 200 text messages. They were all like vultures, hungry for gossip and details of her public shame. She put a hand on her stomach and whispered, "I am so sorry. I failed you before you even had a chance." Later that night, Sarah found Vanessa on the cold bathroom floor. At 7 months pregnant, she was crying so hard that she could not catch her breath. "My mother is dead," she gasped. "My husband is gone. I am going to be a homeless mother. What am I going to do?" Sarah sat down on the floor next to her and wrapped her arms around her. "You survive," Sarah said softly. "That is what you do. You take one breath and then another. I do not know how. Then I will breathe for both of us until you remember how." They sat there for an hour, two women, on a cold tile floor, holding each other up against a world that felt impossibly cruel. But they would get through it. They had to. Margaret Lawson had not spent 30 years building an empire just for her daughter to fall apart. And somewhere, inside that safe deposit box, was the proof. This was not the end of Vanessa's story. It was the beginning of the most incredible comeback the city of Atlanta had ever seen. That night, David posted a photo on his Instagram. It was an artistic picture of a sunset. The caption was sickening. "Sometimes choosing your own happiness requires making difficult choices. Hashtag new beginnings." It received 2,847 likes. The comments poured in. "So brave. You deserve to be happy. That is what a real man does." An hour later, his mistress, Claudia, posted her own picture. It showed her hand on her perfectly flat stomach. Life is full of wonderful surprises. Hashtag baby on the way. Hashtag finding love. Their followers congratulated them. They called them courageous for being true to their hearts. No one mentioned the pregnant wife David had abandoned at her mother's funeral. That part of the story did not fit their perfect narrative. The messages Vanessa received told a very different story. Homewrecker. She drove him away. Gold digger got what she deserved. I bet she is faking the pregnancy. Every notification was like a tiny stab to the heart. Finally, Sarah took Vanessa's phone and powered it off. "Stop reading this poison," she said. But the damage was already done. 3 days later, a letter came from David's lawyer. "Mrs. Reynolds, my client wishes for a swift end to this marriage. If you refuse to cooperate, it will lead to a long and difficult court battle. Your fitness for custody will be examined. We suggest you sign the enclosed papers immediately to avoid further pain. Sincerely, Mitchell and Stein, attorneys at law." Sarah read the letter over Vanessa's shoulder. "They are threatening to take your baby," she said, her voice filled with anger. Vanessa felt completely empty inside. "Maybe they should," she whispered. "What kind of mother can I be if I cannot even protect myself?" "Stop that right now," Sarah said, her voice sharp and fierce. "You are grieving. You are pregnant. You are allowed to fall apart for a little while. But you are not allowed to give up." The next afternoon, Vanessa sifted through her mother's things. She was desperate to feel a connection to her, to find anything that felt like Margaret. The jewelry box was on Sarah's coffee table. It was mostly filled with costume jewelry, nothing of real value. But then, she felt a slight ridge on the bottom. She found a hidden compartment. Inside was a small brass key and an envelope. It was marked, "Vanessa, for emergency only." Her hand shook as she tore it open. "My dearest girl," the letter began, "if you are reading this, then I am gone. I prayed you would never need this letter. But I know people. I know how they act when they sense weakness. The key is for safe deposit box 447 at First Atlanta Bank. Inside that box, you will find documents that will change your entire life. For 30 years, I have been building something that no one knows about. I built it for you, for this exact kind of moment. Trust James Morrison. He knows everything. Trust Detective Rivera. He has been watching. But do not trust anyone else until they have earned it. Remember, patience is the most powerful weapon you have. Do not react. Instead, you must plan. I love you more than I can ever say. Now show them what a Lawson woman is made of, Mom." Vanessa read the letter 3 times. Every word was chosen with care. Every instruction was crystal clear. "I need to go to the bank," she said. Sarah looked at her watch. "It is 6 in the evening. We will go first thing in the morning." Vanessa held the key tightly in her hand. "Will you come with me?" "Of course," Sarah said. But what do you think is in there?" Sarah asked. Vanessa looked down at her mother's familiar handwriting. "I have no idea," she said, "but my mother never did anything without a very good reason." The First Atlanta Bank was a grand building made of marble. It was all tall columns and looked very powerful. The safe deposit room was cold, quiet, and private. A bank employee brought them box 447 and then left them alone. With a trembling hand, Vanessa put the key into the lock. It made a solid clicking sound. She lifted the heavy lid. Inside, there were stacks of thick folders. They were filled with legal documents, bank statements, and property deeds. It was the evidence of a secret life her mother had hidden for 30 years. "Oh my gosh," Sarah's voice was just a whisper. Vanessa pulled out the first file. It was labeled Commercial Property, Atlanta Portfolio, with a total value of $87 million. She opened the second one, Tech Investments, which held various stocks currently worth $142 million. A third folder, private equity, was valued at $94 million. Page after page, deed after deed, it was a financial empire built in total secret. How is this even possible? Vanessa's voice trembled. My mother was a bookkeeper. She used coupons to buy groceries. She lived in a tiny apartment and drove a car that was older than I am. At the very bottom of the box, she found another letter. It read, "You are probably in shock right now. Good. Use that shock to give you strength. Every single dollar is legal. Every investment is recorded, and every property is titled in a family trust. You are the only beneficiary. David has no claim to any of it. The prenuptial agreement his mother insisted on protects you completely." The irony is just perfect, is not it? James Morrison has managed this for 20 years. Catherine Blake is my financial planner, and Detective Rivera has been investigating David for the last 6 months. I suspected something was wrong long before I got sick. Everything you need to fight back is in this box. The letter continued. But you must remember, do not fight with anger. You must fight smart. They think they have ruined you. For now, let them believe that. Mom. Vanessa sat in complete silence, stunned. A whole minute went by before Sarah gently touched her shoulder and said, "Say something." A new expression appeared in Vanessa's eyes. It was not grief anymore. It was determination. My mother knew, she said. She knew he would do this. How could she possibly know? Vanessa stood up, her hands steady as she gathered the documents. She did not know for sure, but she knew someone might try to use me one day. So she prepared me to be able to fight back. Vanessa looked directly at Sarah. And now I am going to do just that. The law office of James Morrison was on the 40th floor of a glass skyscraper with breathtaking views of Atlanta. The man himself met them at the door with a warm, professional smile. "Mrs. Reynolds," he said, or should I say Mrs. Lawson, "your mother told me you might go back to using your maiden name." Vanessa replied, "I have not decided yet." "Well," he said, "whoever you decide to be, you are now one of the wealthiest women in Georgia." He brought up a presentation on a massive screen. It showed charts and graphs that summarized 30 years of incredible investing. "Your mother spent 3 decades building this," he explained. "She started with just $50,000. It was an inheritance from her own mother," James continued, "and she turned it into $500 million through smart, patient investing." "But she lived so simply," Vanessa said. "Why would she hide all of this?" "For protection," he answered. "She saw how wealthy people were used, manipulated, and became targets. She wanted you to have financial security without being a target yourself." He clicked to the next slide, which showed a series of complex legal trust structures. Everything is in a special trust with you as the only beneficiary. David has absolutely zero claim, even though you were married when your mother passed away. The prenuptial agreement that Linda insisted on specifically leaves out any inheritance. Sarah spoke up softly. "So, Linda protected Vanessa completely by accident." James allowed a small smile. "Your mother Margaret called it cosmic justice. They were so busy protecting David's small trust fund that they accidentally protected Vanessa's massive inheritance." Vanessa asked, "What can I do with all this?" "Practically anything you want," James replied. "The assets bring in about $2.3 million every month in passive income. You never have to work another day in your life." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. "Or," he continued, "you can use it to completely destroy the people who tried to destroy you." James then placed a thick folder on the table marked Detective Rivera, Confidential. "Your mother hired Detective Rivera 6 months before she passed. She sensed something was wrong with David, and she was right. Photos spilled out onto the conference table. There was David and Claudia at a hotel in October, 10 months ago. Another showed them at a restaurant in November, holding hands. Then another at her apartment in December. A spreadsheet showed a timeline, proving the affair started almost a full year before the funeral. It had not just started recently, as David had claimed. Vanessa's hands were shaking as she looked at the photos. 10 months, she whispered. He has been with her for 10 months. James then showed her printed text messages. One from Claudia to a friend, dated 8 months ago, read, "I found my perfect guy. He is an investment banker from a rich family, and he is miserable in his marriage. He is weak, the perfect target. I just need to get pregnant, and he is all mine. Or I should say, his money is mine." The friend replied, "The pregnancy trick again? Did not that get you into trouble in Vegas?" Claudia texted back, "This time I am smarter. I found tutorials online for fake baby bumps and got fake ultrasound apps. He will never know." Well, Vanessa's face grew harder with every word she read. Detective Rivera found 7 similar scams in Claudia's past. Her real name is Claudia Bennington, and she is wanted in Nevada for fraud. "And David believed her?" Vanessa asked. "Men like David believe what they want to believe," James said. She gave him an excuse to leave his marriage without feeling guilty, and he took it. More papers came out of the folder. One was a bank statement showing a wire transfer from Linda Reynolds to Claudia Foster for $15,000. It was dated 3 weeks before Margaret's funeral. The memo line read, "Consulting fee." His own mother paid her. "We have the email exchanges between Linda and Claudia where they planned the timing," James added. James read from one of the printouts. It was an email from Linda to Claudia. It said, "The funeral is the perfect time. She will be too overcome with grief to fight back. Make sure David does not lose his nerve." Something inside Vanessa finally broke. It was not her spirit. It was the last little piece of hope that this had all been a spontaneous, unplanned mistake instead of pure, calculated cruelty. "They plan to do this at my mother's grave," she said, her voice low. Sarah's voice was filled with rage. "This is a conspiracy. This is criminal." "It is prosecutable," James confirmed, "if you want to press charges." Vanessa carefully closed the folder. "Not yet," she said. "My mother told me to fight smart, not angry." She looked at James. "What else do you have for me?" Her next meeting was in a fancy office with a view of Peachtree Street. Catherine Blake, a woman of 42 who looked as sharp as broken glass, was reviewing Vanessa's portfolio on several screens. "Your mother was one of the most brilliant clients I have ever had," Catherine said. "She understood something most people do not. Wealth is not about spending money. It is about leverage." "I do not know what that means," Vanessa admitted. "It means money gives you power," Catherine explained, her eyes gleaming. "But only if you use it in a smart way. Your mother built this entire fortune to protect you. Now," Catherine continued, "we can use it to make sure the people who hurt you understand exactly what they threw away." Sarah shifted in her chair, looking uncomfortable. "Are we talking about getting revenge?" "I prefer to call it consequences," Catherine smiled. "But we need a plan." She pulled up a presentation with 3 options. Option 1, you stay invisible. You live a quiet, comfortable life, and David never finds out what he walked away from. Option 2, we go public right away. A huge shock that destroys his reputation overnight. Catherine's smile grew wider. "And then there is option 3, your mother's favorite method. You slowly build your public image. You let him see little glimpses of your new life. You will drive him crazy wondering where all this money came from," Catherine explained. "Then, When he is at his most confused and insecure, we reveal everything in one single, devastating moment. Why would we wait? Vanessa asked. Because a big reveal without any context is just gossip. But if you spend the next few months becoming a respected, admired, and visible part of Atlanta society, joining charity boards, making donations, being photographed with the mayor, then when we expose what David did, it is not just gossip, it is news. She paused for effect. And news travels much further than gossip ever could. Vanessa finally understood. My mother planned every step of this. She gave you the playbook, Catherine said, but you have to decide if you want to run the plays. Vanessa looked over at Sarah, who gave a slow nod. I will support you no matter what you choose, Sarah said. But if I am being honest, I want to see them burn. Vanessa turned back to Catherine. Tell me exactly what we need to do. The next 6 weeks were a whirlwind of change. Vanessa, now 8 months pregnant, worked with Catherine to create a public identity that would make David Reynolds question everything. A personal shopper at a high-end department store helped her pick out designer maternity clothes. Nothing too flashy, Catherine had instructed. We are aiming for subtle elegance. You are not hiding anymore. Own who you are. A professional stylist worked wonders with Vanessa's hair. It was not a dramatic change, but the difference was huge. She looked like she had money, like she came from old money, the kind of wealth that does not need to announce itself. Her first public event was a charity luncheon for the Children's Hospital. When Vanessa walked into the ballroom at the Ritz-Carlton, conversations literally stopped. 800 guests, most of whom had never laid eyes on her before, watched her walk to a VIP table near the stage. She wrote a check for $500,000 and made sure the donation was announced publicly. The society columnist for the local paper took pictures of everything. Other guests started whispering, "Who is she?" I heard she is Margaret Lawson's daughter. Margaret the bookkeeper? How could she possibly have that kind of money? The whispers were exactly what Catherine had planned for. They were questions without answers, creating a mystery that people desperately wanted to solve. Over the next month, Vanessa was seen at 3 more events. A gallery opening where she bought a painting for $75,000 and a board meeting for a women's shelter where she spoke about overcoming feelings of powerlessness. She even attended a mayor's breakfast where she was seated just 2 chairs away from the city council president. The society pages started featuring her picture with captions like, "Mysterious philanthropist emerges. A new face in Atlanta society." And "The woman everyone wants to meet." At the mayor's big charity luncheon, 800 guests filled the Ritz-Carlton ballroom. Vanessa arrived perfectly on time and was led to a VIP table near the front. She sat down next to Marcus Cameron, a tech billionaire, whose company her mother had invested in years ago. Across the room, Linda Reynolds sat with her friends from the country club. Linda's fork stopped halfway to her mouth when she spotted Vanessa. "Excuse me," Linda said through clenched teeth. She walked over to Vanessa's table, a fake smile plastered on her face. "Vanessa," she said, "this is quite a surprise." Vanessa looked up at her, calm and cheerful. "Hello, Linda. How are you?" Linda's eyes scanned Vanessa's designer dress and her jewelry, which looked real because it was. "I am confused," Linda said, her voice low. "Very confused. What are you doing here?" "I was invited," Vanessa replied simply. "I am a donor." "Where is all this money coming from?" Linda hissed. "Your mother was just a bookkeeper." Vanessa smiled a calm, knowing smile. "My mother was many things that people did not understand. It seems I inherited a lot more than just her furniture." Vanessa redirected her attention back to Marcus Cameron, completely brushing Linda aside. Is there something you needed, Linda? I have other people to see. Linda's face twisted, showing she was losing the upper hand she thought she had. David mentioned your mother's money. We are looking into it. Look all you want. Vanessa's voice remained calm and sweet. Everything is completely legal. Everything is documented. And everything belongs to me. She paused for a moment. Give David my best, or do not. I honestly do not care anymore. Vanessa turned and walked away. Linda just stood there, completely powerless, before she went back to her table with trembling hands. David's temporary apartment was tiny and generic. It was a huge step down from the beautiful house he once shared with Vanessa. He was pacing back and forth while talking to his mother on his phone. She was at the mayor's luncheon, sitting with Marcus Cameron and the president of the city council. What on earth is going on? I have no idea. Linda's voice sounded weak through the speaker. But we have to figure out where all this money came from. What if Margaret's assets were obtained illegally? Do you think she was cleaning dirty money or something? I think we have to explore every single possibility. Your father is on the phone with our accountant right now. Claudia walked out of the bedroom wearing loose, baggy clothes, with one hand resting on her flat stomach. She was supposedly 4.5 months pregnant by now, but there were no obvious signs. What is the matter? It is Vanessa. She is all over social media, donating hundreds of thousands of dollars and showing up at big events. Everyone is talking about her. I thought you told me her mother had nothing. That is what I thought too. David's voice got louder, but it turns out she had millions, maybe even hundreds of millions, and I signed away any right to it. A calculating look crossed Claudia's face. Her little scam had just become much more complicated. Well, you have me, now. You have our baby. That is what is important. David looked down at her stomach, really looked, for the very first time. When is your next doctor's visit? Next week, why? I want to go with you. Baby, I already told you, my doctor prefers... His voice turned cold and firm. I do not care what your doctor prefers. I am going. Claudia swallowed hard, feeling trapped. An email from James Morrison arrived at the perfect moment. David's lawyer wants to schedule a meeting. They want to talk about a quick settlement. Vanessa was sitting in James's office, right across from him. What does that mean? It means he wants to get out of this divorce as fast as possible. He is offering you full custody, no support payments, a completely clean break. Sarah, who was sitting next to Vanessa, sounded thrilled. That is everything you ever wanted. Why now? Vanessa asked, feeling suspicious. He sees your new public image and realizes what he lost. He wants to end this before you can use the divorce to expose him even more. Catherine's face appeared on the video screen. You should take it. This is much better than dragging him through the courts. Vanessa thought about it. Do you really think so? You get grace, you get your freedom, and you get to start over without him being anywhere in your life. Sometimes, winning is not about destroying the other person. It is about walking away with the things that truly matter. Sarah nodded in agreement. She is right. You have already won, V. Just take the win. A wave of relief washed over Vanessa for the first time in weeks. Okay, accept the settlement. Let us just end this. That evening, Vanessa and Sarah were celebrating at the estate. Vanessa had moved into her mother's real home. It was hidden away behind gates and ancient oak trees. The house had 6 bedrooms and a library that smelled of old leather and wisdom. The gardens looked like they stretched on for miles. Sarah raised her glass of sparkling cider to Margaret, who planned every single detail perfectly. Vanessa touched her glass to Sarah's, to Mom, and to being done with David Reynolds for good. They took a drink. Vanessa felt something she had not experienced in months. It was peace, or at least something very close to it. Maybe I do not need some big revenge plan. Maybe this is enough. I have my baby on the way. I have money, and I have my freedom. You sound relieved. I am. I just want to move on, start to heal, and focus on being a good mother. Her phone buzzed. It was a text from James. The settlement papers are ready for you to sign tomorrow. Vanessa smiled at Sarah. It is really over. She walked over to the fireplace, where she had put the folders full of evidence. All the photos, the text messages, the proof of his betrayal. She took them out. I do not need these anymore. Sarah hesitated. Are you sure? Once you destroy them, they are gone for good. I am sure. I want to stop being so angry. I want to stop wanting revenge. I want to heal. She set the folders on the coffee table and started shredding the pages into the recycling bin. What Sarah did not know was that these were just copies. The original documents were locked away safely in James's vault, but Vanessa made a show of shredding the papers, knowing that word would get back to David eventually. Her mother had taught her well, never destroy your only leverage. But sometimes you have to make your enemy think you did. The Reynolds family home looked just the same as always from the street, but inside, Linda, Robert, and a top-tier forensic accountant were looking over documents spread out on the dining room table. Margaret Lawson's tax filings from 15 years ago show some irregularities, the accountant said carefully. Robert leaned in closer. What sort of irregularities? The capital gains, she reported, do not line up with the assets she acquired in the years that followed. It is possible she was hiding sources of income. A predatory look came over Linda's face. Tax evasion. I am not saying that for sure, but there is enough here to justify an Internal Revenue Service investigation if someone were to file a complaint. Linda looked at Robert. Do it. If we are wrong, we are wrong. But we will not be. And even if we are, an investigation will freeze all of her accounts for months, maybe even years. That is more than enough time for David to file for custody before she has the money to fight back. The notification popped up on Vanessa's phone 3 days later. Local philanthropist, under federal investigation. The Internal Revenue Service opens probe into Margaret Lawson estate. Her blood turned to ice. Media reports started pouring in. Questions were being raised about the source of Vanessa Lawson's wealth. An anonymous tip leads to a tax fraud investigation. Did the deceased bookkeeper avoid paying millions in taxes? Social media exploded with comments. I knew something was suspicious. It is probably drug money or fraud money. She always seemed too good to be true. Within a few hours, the phone calls started. The chairman of the charity board was apologetic, but his tone was firm. Vanessa, we are going to need you to step aside until this is all cleared up. It is just temporary, for the good of the organization's reputation. But I did not do anything wrong. My mother did not either. I believe you, but the public perception is what matters now. I am so sorry. 3 more calls came in, all with the same message. All of her positions on charity boards were suspended. James Morrison showed up at Vanessa's estate the next morning, looking very serious. David has withdrawn the settlement offer. He has filed an emergency motion. He handed her the legal papers. Vanessa read them with shaking hands. He is claiming that your fortune was obtained illegally. He is asking for full custody of the baby, and you would only get supervised visits. On what grounds? He is claiming that you are inheriting the profits of tax fraud, and that you would provide an unfit environment for a child. The hearing is scheduled for 2 weeks from now, right after your due date. Sarah jumped to her feet, furious. They planned this. They waited until she is just about to give birth. The judge has issued a temporary order. If the baby is born before the custody hearing, Child Protective Services will place the infant in temporary foster care. until the hearing is over. Vanessa felt like her whole world was caving in. They are going to take my baby. They are going to take Grace. We will fight this. But the Internal Revenue Service investigation makes things very complicated. Federal investigations take at least 6 to 12 months. During that time, my daughter will be in foster care. She could not catch her breath. She was 8.5 months pregnant, surrounded by legal papers that threatened to steal her child from her before she even had a chance to meet her. That night, Vanessa sat all alone in her bedroom, 8.5 months pregnant. Legal documents were scattered all around her on the floor. Everything was falling apart all over again, only this time it was worse. She picked up her phone. David's number was still in her contacts. Her finger hovered over the call button. Maybe if she just gave up the money, signed it all over to them, maybe then they would let her keep her baby. Maybe that is what a good mother would do, protect her child no matter the cost. She looked at the photograph on her nightstand. It was Margaret holding her as a baby. Her mother's eyes seemed to be looking right at her. "What would you do, Mom?" Then she noticed something behind the photo frame. It was another envelope, with words written on it. "If they attack you, legally." She tore it open, with shaking hands. Inside were official clearance letters from the Internal Revenue Service, dated 15 years ago. Every single penny was accounted for. There was also a note from Margaret. "I knew they would try something like this. A tax attorney named David Sheffield has copies of everything. Call him immediately." There was a second note, and I found something on them too. "Only use this if you absolutely have to." Vanessa grabbed her phone and dialed the number. "Mrs. Lawson," the attorney's voice was calm and reassuring. "Your mother hired me 10 years ago for this exact situation. Can you stop the investigation? The Internal Revenue Service has to investigate once a complaint has been filed, but I can speed up the process with the documents I have. We can get this cleared up in 4 to 6 weeks instead of months. That is not fast enough. The custody hearing is in 2 weeks, but I can file for an emergency stay of the custody proceedings. The family court judge cannot make a ruling about an unfit environment while the investigation is still open and you have not been charged with anything." Vanessa took a deep breath for the first time in hours. "There is something else," Sheffield said. "Your mother's investigation into the Reynolds family also found some irregularities. Robert Reynolds is the head of the Reynolds Family Charitable Foundation. Over the last 8 years, he has embezzled $2.3 million from it. Fake payments to vendors, ghost employees, shell companies. Can we prove it? Your mother already did. We have bank statements, tax filings, and witness statements from former employees. It is all documented." He paused. "She did not want you to use this unless it was absolutely necessary. She said that fighting dirty should always be the last resort." Vanessa's voice turned ice cold. "They tried to take my baby. It is necessary." The next morning, a war council gathered in Vanessa's living room. James Morrison and Catherine Blake joined through a video call. The tax attorney, David Sheffield, was on speakerphone. Sarah paced nervously by the windows while Detective Michael Rivera was there in person. Rivera, a man in his mid-40s, had an air of authority that came from years of investigating financial crimes. He placed several thick folders on the coffee table. "I have been looking into this for 8 months. Here's what we have, Fitzin." He began, opening the files. The affair between David and Claudia started 10 months before the funeral. "This was all planned, documented, and undeniable," he continued. "Claudia Bennington has 7 previous fraud charges in 3 different states and uses 5 aliases. She is a professional con artist. Linda Reynolds paid Claudia $15,000 3 weeks before the funeral. The wire transfer memo clearly says consulting fee. Robert Reynolds stole $2.3 million from his family's charity over 8 years, and the Internal Revenue Service complaint against Margaret's estate was filed from a computer at Linda Reynolds's home. We traced the IP address that is filing a false federal report, which is a felony. Vanessa took it all in. So, we have them on multiple charges. Yes, Rivera confirmed, but we have a problem. What kind of problem? Vanessa asked. The judge assigned to your custody case is Judge Patricia Morgan. She and Linda Reynolds play golf together every week. They are close friends. Sarah exploded with anger. That is judicial bias. She has to remove herself from the case. James shook his head. She will not do that without pressure, and filing a complaint would take weeks that we do not have. Catherine's voice came through the speakers. So, we will not go to her court. Everyone turned to look at the monitor. What do you mean? We will hold our own trial in public, at the gala, she said. Vanessa looked confused. What gala? The Margaret Lawson Foundation inaugural gala. It is scheduled for 3 days after your due date, Catherine explained. There will be 800 guests, and every news outlet in Atlanta has been invited. It will be live streamed to more than 50,000 viewers. James looked doubtful. We cannot just present evidence at a charity event. No, Rivera said, leaning forward, but I can. If I submit all of this evidence to the district attorney's office first, following the correct procedures, and then we release it to the public at the gala, it is not vigilante justice. It is transparency. Understanding washed over Vanessa's face. We expose them in public, and then they get arrested. Exactly, Catherine said. And with that much public attention, Judge Morgan cannot give them any special treatment. She would be watched too closely. But the custody hearing is before the gala, Vanessa pointed out. James met her gaze. Then you do not show up. A heavy silence filled the room. If you do not appear, the judge has to reschedule, he explained. It buys us 2 weeks. That is enough time to make everything public first. That is contempt of court, Sarah protested. Yes, James agreed. You could be arrested, but I would rather you get arrested after the truth is out than lose grace before we even have a chance to fight. Vanessa looked around at her team, her mother's team. These were the people Margaret had brought together to protect her daughter when she no longer could. I am risking jail time. You are risking a contempt charge, Rivera corrected her. That is usually just a fine, maybe probation. But you will not lose your daughter. If the district attorney agrees, and with this evidence they will, warrants will be issued. We will time the arrests for the biggest impact, at the gala, on camera. Vanessa put a hand on her stomach. Grace kicked, as if she was voting yes. My mother planned for all of this. Catherine nodded. She gave you the weapons, but you have to decide if you are going to use them. There was a long pause as Vanessa considered every risk and every possible outcome. Set it up, she finally said, standing with her hand on her belly. The gala, the meeting with the district attorney, everything. They came for my baby. Now they will see what happens when you threaten a Lawson woman's child. Labor began on a Thursday morning, 3 days after Vanessa's due date. After 7 hours of pain, with Sarah coaching her through each contraction, Vanessa gasped. What if they take her? What if I only get to hold her this one time? That is not going to happen, Sarah said firmly. We have a plan. Plans fail. What if it fails? Sarah grabbed her hand, her grip fierce. Listen to me. You are Margaret Lawson's daughter. You are so much stronger than they could ever imagine. You are going to hold your baby, and you are going to fight for her with everything you have. After one final push, a baby's cry filled the room. It is a girl. They placed the tiny, perfect baby on Vanessa's chest. Grace was screaming with healthy lungs, but she stopped crying as soon as she heard her mother's voice. She opened her eyes. "Hi, Grace. Hi, baby girl. I am your mama, and I promise you, I promise, nobody is ever taking you from me." The next day, David stood outside the nursery. He was looking through the glass at baby Grace. The security guard would not let him inside because Vanessa had forbidden it. His face showed an expression Vanessa had not seen in months. Real emotion. It looked like something was breaking inside him as he saw his daughter for the very first time. He called Vanessa's hospital room. "What do you want, David?" I saw her through the window," he said, his voice thick. "She is beautiful." "Is that why you called? To tell me that?" "I called to say that I made a mistake," he admitted. "The biggest mistake of my life, and I want to be a father. Can we please talk?" Vanessa looked at Grace, sleeping peacefully in her arms. "Come tomorrow. Visiting hours are from 10 to 8. "Really?" he asked, surprised. "Yes. But David, if you are coming here to threaten me, or to manipulate me, or to try and take her, then do not bother." "I will not. I just want to meet my daughter." After she hung up the phone, Sarah gave her a questioning look. "You are really letting him visit?" "No," Vanessa said, "but I want him to think I am. I want him to show up tomorrow and find that I am already gone. I want him to know exactly what it feels like when someone you love just disappears." Sarah smiled. "You really are your mother's daughter." "Damn right I am." The custody hearing took place without Vanessa. Judge Patricia Morgan sat on the bench. David and his lawyer were there. Claudia sat beside him in a dress that was meant to hide her supposed 6-month pregnancy. Vanessa's chair was empty. "Counsel, where is your client?" the judge asked. James Morrison stood up. "Your Honor, Mrs. Lawson gave birth 48 hours ago and is suffering from postpartum complications. We request a continuance." David's lawyer immediately objected. "Your Honor, this is clearly a tactic to delay the proceedings. We move for an immediate—" "I am granting a 2-week continuance," the judge interrupted. "But Mrs. Lawson, if you fail to appear again, I will issue a warrant for your arrest." The gavel fell. David looked terrified, finally realizing that he was losing control of the situation. A news alert went out that afternoon. The Internal Revenue Service had closed its investigation into the Lawson estate, finding no wrongdoing. The anonymous complaint was found to be malicious and baseless. The media coverage changed instantly. The philanthropist's name was cleared of all allegations. The public learned about the false accusations made against a grieving mother. Public opinion swung completely back in Vanessa's favor. The narrative that David and his family had tried to create was falling apart. 3 days later, David showed up at Vanessa's estate. Security called her first. Vanessa, who was recovering from childbirth and looking strong, agreed to see him. He walked into the living room holding a bouquet of flowers. He looked broken in a way she had never seen before. Sarah stood close by, and security waited at the door. "Thank you for seeing me," he said. Vanessa's voice was cold. "You have 10 minutes. He walked toward her slowly, his eyes fixed on the baby in her arms. Tears welled up in his eyes. Can I hold her?" Vanessa paused for a moment, then nodded. She carefully handed Grace to him, watching his face as he held his daughter for the very first time. David broke down completely, sobbing. "She is perfect. God, she is so perfect." "Yes, she is," Vanessa agreed. He looked at Vanessa through his tears. "I was so wrong about everything," he confessed. "About Claudia, my mother, the divorce, all of it. I was weak and selfish and cruel. Yes, you were, Vanessa said bluntly. Her directness seemed to catch him by surprise. I know I do not deserve to be forgiven, but I am asking anyway. For Grace's sake, she deserves to have her father. Vanessa watched him holding their daughter. She saw real remorse in his eyes. She saw a glimpse of the man she had once loved, buried deep beneath all his mistakes. What about Claudia? She asked. It is over. I ended it. I finally saw her for what she is. I saw them all for what they are, my mother, my father. They used me, he said. They used you. They used our marriage as a weapon. He paused. I want to make this right, no matter how long it takes. Sarah gave Vanessa a warning glance, but Vanessa's determination was starting to soften. What are you asking for? Couples counseling, he suggested. A chance to rebuild trust. Not marriage, not yet, but maybe we can co-parent. I want a real relationship with Grace. He gently handed the baby back to Vanessa. I will sign anything you want. I will give you whatever you want. I just want to be in her life. And in your life, if you will let me. Vanessa looked down at Grace, then back at David. I need to think about it. Of course, he said. Take all the time you need. He stood up to leave, but then turned back. Vanessa, I am sorry for everything, especially for what I did at your mother's grave. That was unforgivable. But I am going to spend the rest of my life trying to make it right. After he left, Sarah immediately spoke up. V, you cannot be seriously considering this. Grace deserves to know her father, Vanessa replied. And maybe people can change. Maybe he is really trying. Or maybe this is just another manipulation, Sarah warned. Maybe, Vanessa admitted. But for her, I have to try. Over the next 2 weeks, David was always at the estate. They had couples counseling sessions where he took full responsibility for his actions. He had visits where he played with Grace, while Vanessa watched him carefully. They even had family dinners that felt almost normal. Eventually, he moved into the guest house, separate from the main residence, to take things slowly. The media coverage was positive, focusing on their reconciliation for the baby's sake and the idea of second chances after betrayal. The public loved the story of healing. For the first time in months, Vanessa felt a sense of hope. Maybe her happy ending did not need revenge. Maybe all it needed was healing. One evening, while they were in the library, David brought up an idea that would prove to be a fatal mistake. What if we just dropped the court case completely, he suggested. We could have joint custody. No lawyers, no judges. Just us, figuring it out together. Really? Vanessa asked. I do not want to fight with you anymore, V, he said. I just want to be a father. A wave of relief washed over her. Okay, she said. Let's do that. They shook hands. David then pulled her into a hug, and she let him. She felt the weight of the past few months begin to lift. After he left, Vanessa looked at the folder of evidence she had kept locked away in the library. These were the originals, not the copies she had shredded. Model. Perhaps it was time to let go of the anger. Maybe she did not need these files anymore. As Sarah walked in, she saw Vanessa hesitating. Are you sure? Sarah asked. I am, Vanessa replied. Grace is healthy, David is trying to be a good father, and the custody case is over. This is what I always wanted. She carefully pulled a few pages from the top of the stack and began to shred them. It was a convincing performance, designed to be seen. She left the pile of shredded paper where David would be sure to find it, proof that she was moving on. But the bulk of the evidence remained safely hidden. Her mother always said, trust, but verify. 3 days later, that advice would save her. Vanessa carried a dinner tray to the guest house where David was staying. She was playing the part, being kind, and building trust. He was in the shower when she got there, but his phone was lying on the counter. It buzzed. A new message from his mother, Linda, appeared on the screen. Phase 2 complete. Did she destroy the evidence? Moving to Phase 3, Friday at 2 p.m. Judge Morgan confirmed. Vanessa's blood turned to ice. With trembling hands, she picked up the phone and opened the messages. The entire conversation between Linda and David was there, revealing their entire scheme. Has she destroyed the investigation files yet? Linda had asked. David's reply was chilling. Not yet. I am working on building her trust. I think she is softening. Linda's next message was sharp. Work faster. We need those files gone before the gala. David seemed to hesitate. I hate this lying to her again. She is trying so hard to believe me. But Linda was ruthless. Do you want your child or not? Do you want access to that money or not? Stop being so weak. David's reply came a moment later. I know. You are right. Linda laid out the final part of the plan. Once she destroys the evidence, we file for emergency custody. Dr. Peterson will testify that she has postpartum depression. Judge Morgan will rule in our favor. David asked, and then? Linda's response sealed his fate. Then you get grace. And through child support, you get access to Vanessa's fortune. Exactly as we planned. Vanessa's hand shook as she kept scrolling. She found photos of David meeting with a woman named Claudia at a coffee shop just yesterday. The messages between them were even worse. Claudia had texted, "Miss me?" David replied, "This is business only. When this is over, we split the money." Claudia's response was greedy. 50-50, just like we agreed. David confirmed, "Yes. I just need to get custody first." There was also a group chat between David, Linda, and a man named Robert. Robert had written, "The fake postpartum diagnosis is all set. Dr. Peterson owes me a favor from that matter at the country club." Linda had asked about the judge. Robert's reply was smug. "Judge Morgan will rule in David's favor. I have handled it." David was worried. What about the gala? What if she goes public there? Linda's message was confident. Without the evidence files, it is just her word against ours. Nobody will believe her, and by then, we will have grace. The shower shut off. In a flash, Vanessa put the phone back exactly where she found it. David walked out, wrapped in a towel. "Hey," he said, "I did not hear you come in." Vanessa's heart was pounding in her chest, but her voice was steady. "I just brought you some dinner. I will leave you to it." She walked out calmly, made it back to the main house, and locked the door behind her. Only then did she collapse, letting out a silent scream of agony. Sarah rushed to her side. What happened? Without a word, Vanessa showed her the photos she had taken of David's phone. "It was all fake," Vanessa whispered, her voice trembling. Every word, every tear, every single moment with Grace. It was all just to get me to destroy the evidence. Sarah stared at the phone, her horror growing with every message she read. "Oh my God! And I almost believed him. I almost let you destroy the real files." In her bassinet nearby, baby Grace started to cry. Vanessa scooped her up and held her tight. "They are never going to stop," she sobbed. "They will never stop trying to take you away from me." An hour later, Detective Rivera arrived. Vanessa had called him the second she calmed down. He held up his tablet, showing her a series of photos taken over the past week. "I have been following David," he said grimly. "Your mother would have wanted you to know the truth." The photos confirmed everything. There was David meeting Claudia at the coffee shop. There was David meeting with Dr. Peterson at the hospital. And there was David entering Judge Morgan's private home, not her office. The reconciliation was always a trick, Rivera explained. They are moving forward with the emergency custody hearing. It is scheduled for Friday at 2 p.m. That is in 48 hours. Vanessa felt sick. But the Foundation's gala is Friday at 7 p.m. Rivera nodded. That is the point. They are timing it so you will have already lost custody before you get a chance to go public with your story. If we wait for your gala, they will already have Grace. You will just look like a scorned ex-wife, making up stories. Can you not arrest them for conspiracy now? We cannot do that without more solid evidence. The text messages are not enough proof. They will just say they were joking, or that their words were misunderstood. We need them to make a move. James showed up next, and his expression was serious. Judge Morgan has rescheduled the hearing for tomorrow morning at 9. Sarah shot to her feet. They are pushing the schedule forward. Catherine joined them on a video call. They are aware of the gala. They are trying to get Grace before you have a chance to reveal the truth. Vanessa spoke in a soft, broken voice. So, in 12 hours, they are just going to take my baby away, and I can do nothing about it. Later that night, Vanessa sat in the rocking chair in the nursery, holding Grace as she slept. Sarah watched from the doorway. Both women were tired, scared, and completely out of ideas. I cannot allow them to take her. I just cannot. We will keep fighting. James will handle it. But James cannot fight a corrupt judge. He cannot fight false psychiatric evaluations. He cannot fight a legal system that always protects rich families like the Reynolds. Vanessa's voice grew frantic. I only have one option left. I have to run. Tonight, she declared, standing up, I will take Grace and we will disappear. I will use my mother's money to vanish. Sarah looked horrified. Vanessa, if you run, they will call it kidnapping. You will become a fugitive. I do not care, Vanessa said, her hands shaking as she started packing a diaper bag. As long as Grace is safe, we can go to Canada, then Europe, somewhere they can never find us. Sarah was torn. And you will spend the rest of your life looking over your shoulder, teaching your daughter how to hide? That is not living. It is better than losing her, Vanessa cried. Grace woke up and began to cry. As Vanessa picked her up, tears streamed down her own face. I am so sorry, baby girl. Mama tried so hard to be strong, but sometimes running is the only way to keep you safe. Just then, headlights swept across the driveway. It was Detective Rivera and James Morrison arriving for an emergency meeting at 2 in the morning. Everyone gathered in the living room, their faces etched with exhaustion and desperation. James placed a thick, sealed envelope on the table. Your mother left this for you, he said. It was marked, for when all else fails. With trembling hands, Vanessa opened it. Inside were 6 USB drives, a letter from her mother, Margaret, and a stack of legal documents. She began to read the letter aloud, her voice breaking. My darling girl, if you are reading this, it means they are trying to take Grace from you. I am so sorry. I am not there to protect you both, the letter continued. But I did what I could. For the last 6 months of my life, I had Detective Rivera install listening devices throughout the Reynolds home. With their permission, of course, it is probably not legal and definitely not admissible in court. But it is leverage. Absolute leverage. These drives contain audio recordings of Linda and Robert planning to destroy you, planning to use David, and planning to take Grace. They planned everything. You cannot use this in court, but you can use it to make them afraid. You can use it to force their hand. You can make them destroy themselves just by trying to cover it all up. Trust your team. Trust yourself. And trust that sometimes fighting dirty is the only way to protect something precious. I love you forever, Mom. Vanessa looked up at Detective Rivera, stunned. You bugged their house? He nodded. Your mother paid me to install audio and video surveillance in every room except the bathrooms and bedrooms. We have 6 months of recordings. Catherine's voice crackled through the video call. Holy cow. James looked uneasy. This is ethically complicated, but can we use it at the gala? You cannot use it in court, Catherine said, but nothing is stopping you from playing it at a private event. It is your mother's property. You inherited it. Rivera agreed. And once it is public, the district attorney will have to investigate. The public pressure will be enormous. But they are taking Grace in 7 hours, Vanessa said, feeling hopeless again. The gala is not for another 12 hours. How does this help us now? Catherine leaned in close to her camera. You do not go to the hearing. Everyone in the room stared at the screen. What? If you are not there, they cannot take Grace. They will issue an order for contempt of court, but that takes time. In the meantime, you go ahead with the gala tonight and make everything public. Then you turn yourself in, Catherine finished. Sarah was aghast. She will be arrested. For what? Missing a hearing? Vanessa looked at James. What is the penalty for that? Contempt of court, he explained. Usually a fine, maybe a few days in jail. It is nothing compared to losing Grace. Rivera added, and once those recordings are public, the judge who issued the warrants will be under investigation herself. She will not be able to rule against you. Vanessa looked down at Grace, sleeping in her arms, then at the faces of her team, her mother's team. So I go into hiding for 12 hours. I miss the hearing. I go to the gala, and I expose everything. Then I deal with the consequences, she finished. That is the plan. She looked at Rivera. But where do I hide? I have a safe house, he said. It is off the books. They will never find you there. Vanessa looked at each person in the room, Sarah, James, Rivera, and Catherine on the screen. All of them were willing to risk everything for her and for Grace. This is insane, she breathed. Sarah smiled softly. Your mother planned for it. My mother was insane, Vanessa replied. Your mother was a genius, Catherine corrected her. It is time to decide, Vanessa. Vanessa stood up, holding Grace close. Okay, we do it. All of it. I am done playing defense. She met each person's eyes, her own filled with a new fire. Let's show them what happens when you threaten a Lawson woman's child. The grand ballroom at the Four Seasons was gleaming under massive crystal chandeliers. 800 guests, all dressed in their finest formal wear, mingled and talked. The media was everywhere, with cameras capturing every moment. A large banner read, Margaret Lawson Foundation Inaugural Gala. Displays around the room showcased the foundation's planned work, women's shelters, legal aid clinics, and education programs. It all looked legitimate because it was. This was real work that would continue long after this night was over. The Reynolds family made their grand entrance at 7 p.m. They were dressed to kill. Linda wore pearls and a look of predatory confidence, while Robert looked dapper in his best suit. David stood between them, looking almost triumphant. They believed they had already won. Vanessa had failed to appear at the hearing that morning. A warrant had been issued for her arrest for contempt of court, and Child Protective Services had been granted temporary custody of Grace. The baby was supposed to be in protective care while the system sorted things out. What they did not know was that Grace was safe and hidden with Detective Rivera, and Vanessa was preparing for the most important performance of her entire life. Just then, Claudia emerged from the restroom. She was no longer hiding in the shadows. She walked right up to David and publicly placed a hand on her flat stomach. Her stomach was flat, yet she was supposedly 7 months along. Of course, there was no bump because there was no baby. There never had been. Reporters rushed toward Mr. Reynolds, asking, "Is it true there is a custody dispute?" David's answer was polished and ready. "This is a private family matter. We are simply here tonight to support the Margaret Lawson Foundation." They then took their seats in the special section Catherine had prepared for them, believing in the old saying, to keep your enemies close. At 7:30, the ballroom lights dimmed. A wave of excited whispers spread through the guests as a spotlight shined on the main entrance. Vanessa Lawson made her entrance, but she was not by herself. She was holding Grace, who was now 3 months old, and gazing at the room with wide, curious eyes. Vanessa wore a designer dress and held her head high, with Sarah and Detective Rivera on either side of her. The detective's badge was clearly visible. The entire room fell completely silent. David jumped to his feet, the color draining from his face, as he stammered, "How do you have her? There is a court order." Rivera stepped forward and said, "Mr. Reynolds, I strongly suggest you take your seat." David obeyed. Linda's face was a storm of fury and panic. She had been so sure she would win. Vanessa walked onto the stage, gently handed Grace to Sarah, who stood at the side of the stage where everyone could see the baby. Grace was a living symbol of what this night was truly about. Vanessa approached the podium, and a large screen lowered behind her. She looked out at 800 faces, at the cameras broadcasting live to 50,000 people, and at the individuals in the front row who had tried to ruin her life. "Thank you all for coming tonight," she began. Her voice was steady, clear, and strong. 3 months of agony and careful planning had led to this very moment. 3 months ago, I laid my mother to rest at Oakland Cemetery. It was the most terrible day of my life. And not just because I lost the woman who raised me. It was also the day my husband decided our marriage was over. Murmurs spread through the audience. They all knew this story from the news, but hearing it from her was completely different. He served me with divorce papers right there at her graveside as they were lowering her casket, while the priest was still saying a prayer. I was 7 months pregnant with his child at the time. Camera flashes went off as reporters leaned in. This was turning out to be more dramatic than they had ever imagined. "I am not sharing this for your pity," she continued, "but to provide some background, because what happened after that is a story about being underestimated. It is a story about people who see kindness and think it is weakness. It is about the danger of thinking you truly know what someone is capable of." With a click, the screen behind her lit up, showing a professional photograph of Margaret, confident, smart, and powerful. My mother spent 30 years building a secret fortune that no one knew about. She accumulated $500 million through investments, real estate, and businesses. She lived a simple life, worked behind the scenes, and let everyone misjudge her. The screen filled with numbers, property records, and investment reports, all real and documented. She did this because she knew a very important truth. The greatest defense is to remain unseen until you are ready to be seen. She paused for a moment. She left everything to me, every single dollar, every single property, and she left me one more thing. Another click. Instructions, guidance, and evidence. The presentation of evidence started, each piece more devastating than the last. First, it was David and Claudia's affair. Text messages appeared, time-stamped 10 months before the funeral. Hotel bills and photos of them together proved the affair had started long before David had claimed. Gasps filled the ballroom. People turned to look at David, whose face had turned ghostly white. "My husband did not leave me on a whim," Vanessa explained. "He was coached to leave me by a woman who saw a financial opportunity." Next came the proof of Claudia's fake pregnancy. Her text messages to a friend appeared on the screen. Claudia wrote, "The pregnancy trick always works. All I need are some prosthetics and fake ultrasound pictures. He is too dumb to ask questions." The friend replied, "What if he wants to come to the doctor with you?" Claudia's response was, "I will figure it out. Men like him only see what they want to see." The room was in an uproar. Guests stared at Claudia, who was frozen in her chair, her face as white as a sheet. Claudia Bennington is a professional scammer. She has 7 previous fraud charges in 3 different states. She is not pregnant. She has never been pregnant. David shot up from his chair, his face beet red. That is a lie. She is pregnant. Detective Rivera stood up, his badge displayed. Mr. Reynolds, either you sit down or I will have you removed. David sat back down and turned to Claudia. Are you really not pregnant? He asked. Claudia remained silent, but her face screamed guilt. The third piece of evidence was Linda's payment. A bank transfer appeared on the screen for everyone to see. It was from Linda Reynolds to Claudia Foster for $15,000, dated 3 weeks before Margaret's funeral. The note read, as we discussed, my mother-in-law paid my husband's mistress. Linda paid $15,000 to make sure he would go through with the divorce. Linda stood up and screamed, "This is slander! This is illegal! Where did you get my bank records?" Mrs. Reynolds, everything is legal and documented. The fourth piece of evidence was the reconciliation scam. Recent text messages between Linda and David appeared. Linda wrote, "Has she destroyed the investigation files yet?" David replied, "I am working on it. I am building her trust." Linda urged, "Work faster. Once the evidence is gone, we take grace." The ballroom erupted into complete chaos. People were standing, shouting, and reporters were scrambling to report the story. Cameras were everywhere, capturing the Reynolds family's spectacular public disgrace. 2 weeks ago, Vanessa said, her voice turning hard, David came to me and asked for a second chance. He asked to be a part of Grace's life. I wanted to believe that people could change, but it was all a trap. It was a scheme to get me to destroy the evidence and to get access to my daughter. Then came the audio bombshell. My mother prepared for this as well. For 6 months before she passed away, she had the Reynolds' home monitored. James stood up to provide legal context. These audio recordings were made on private property with the full permission of the property owner. Margaret Lawson was a part owner of the Reynolds family home through a legal trust structure, making this completely legal. It was a legal gray area, but it sounded official enough. I'm going to play 60 seconds of audio. That is all you will need to hear. A click was heard, and then Linda's voice echoed through the ballroom, crystal clear. Once we get custody, we will control her fortune through child support. David will get millions. Then came Robert's voice, and the girl will never know her mother was anything but crazy. Linda spoke again. Exactly. We will make sure everyone believes she was an unfit mother. We will say she had postpartum depression, that she was dangerous. David's voice was weak. What if she fights back? Linda replied, with what? Once you convince her to destroy the evidence, she will have nothing left. The audio recording ended. The ballroom was in a state of pandemonium. Everyone was yelling. Reporters were running for the exits. Cameras flashed like lightning. Detective Rivera took the microphone. For the record, I am Detective Michael Rivera, with the Atlanta Police Department's Financial Crimes Division. Everything you have just witnessed was submitted to the District Attorney's Office 48 hours ago. Warrants were issued this morning. Police officers then entered from several doorways. We allowed this event to happen because Mrs. Lawson wanted you, their friends and peers, to know the truth before they had a chance to twist the narrative. Officers walked toward the Reynolds' table. David Reynolds, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, attempted custodial interference, and wire fraud. Handcuffs clicked onto David's wrists. He stared at Vanessa in total disbelief, as if he could not believe that she had actually defeated him. Linda Reynolds, you are under arrest for filing false federal reports, bribery of public officials, conspiracy to commit kidnapping, and obstruction of justice. More handcuffs snapped shut. Linda's perfectly calm exterior finally broke. She began to weep. her mascara streaming down her face. Robert Reynolds, you are under arrest for embezzlement, charity fraud, tax evasion, and conspiracy. Robert did not resist. He knew he was trapped. Claudia Bennington, you are under arrest for fraud, identity theft, and extortion under false pretenses. Claudia tried to make a run for it, but officers blocked her path. As she was handcuffed, she screamed, "He made me do it! He promised me money!" As David was being led away, he yelled back, "I never promised you anything. We were in this together." They were all escorted out of the ballroom as the media filmed every second. The scandal of the year was being captured by dozens of cameras. It was being broadcast live to thousands of viewers. The room was still buzzing with an electric energy. Vanessa took the microphone one last time, now holding Grace in her arms. Her baby girl looked at all the bright lights with wide, innocent eyes. My mother taught me that the best revenge is not anger, it is patience. She paused. She knew what they would do. She prepared for everything, and she taught me that true power is not about money. It is about using what you have to protect the ones you love. She looked down at Grace. The Margaret Lawson Foundation will now support women who are leaving abusive relationships. It will support children who need someone to fight for them and anyone who has ever been told they are not good enough. She paused for effect, starting tonight with a $75 million endowment. The applause was thunderous. People rose to their feet. This was not just justice, it was charity. It was a form of revenge that served a much greater good. Vanessa looked straight into the cameras that were broadcasting live. They wanted to bury me at my mother's grave. She paused again. They forgot that I am her daughter, and I do not stay buried. The standing ovation was deafening. The media frenzy was bigger than anything Catherine had ever imagined. The story would be the top news story for weeks to come. Vanessa walked off the stage, holding Grace, feeling the heavy burden of the past few months finally lift from her shoulders. It was over. It was finally and completely over. 6 months later, the final act of this drama played out in the courtrooms. David's sentencing was first. He stood there in an orange jumpsuit and shackles, looking 20 years older than the man who had served Vanessa divorce papers at her mother's funeral. The judge declared, "Mr. Reynolds, you are sentenced to 6 years in federal prison, followed by 10 years of probation. Your parental rights are terminated." The gavel fell. As David was led away, he looked back one last time at Vanessa, who was sitting in the gallery. She met his gaze with no emotion, no anger, no triumph, just a sense of closure. Linda and Robert's sentencing took place in a different courtroom. "Mrs. Reynolds, you are sentenced to 8 years in federal prison." Linda's perfect composure finally shattered into a million pieces. She sobbed uncontrollably, her face a mess of streaked mascara. The woman who had planned so much cruelty was now just a broken person, whose desperate pleas were ignored. "Mr. Reynolds, you are sentenced to 12 years in federal prison." Robert accepted the $3 million restitution order with a stoic expression. He had known this judgment was inevitable. The news of the trial's outcome was everywhere. Every member of the Reynolds family was found guilty on all charges. For her part in the conspiracy, Judge Patricia Morgan was disbarred. Claudia Bennington received a 5-year prison sentence. In its first 6 months, the Margaret Lawson Foundation successfully helped 15 families. The entire saga became a powerful symbol. Every person who had ever been looked down on, betrayed, or told they were not good enough saw their own struggles in Vanessa's story. The public support was truly overwhelming. A year after that fateful gala, Vanessa went to the prison to visit David. She brought pictures of their daughter, Grace. The photographs showed a beautiful toddler who was now walking and beginning to form words. The visiting area was cold and sterile. When David walked in, he looked older, like a man who had been completely broken. He had been given a lot of time to reflect on his decisions. Vanessa spoke first. She is walking now. She is even starting to talk. She calls Sarah Auntie. Vanessa slid the pictures across the metal table. David's hands trembled as he reached for them. Tears began to fall down his cheeks as he stared at the images. "She is so beautiful," he whispered. "She looks just like you. She has your eyes and your smile." Vanessa paused for a moment. "I wanted to bring these so you would know exactly what you gave up. I am not trying to be cruel, but I need you to understand." "I understand," he said, his voice hollow and empty. "Every single day I understand. I have nightmares about that cemetery, about the moment I handed you those papers. I wake up knowing I threw away everything that ever mattered for a fantasy that was never real." Vanessa looked at him calmly. "When you are released, if you manage to get parole, you have the right to petition the court for supervised visits. Perhaps then, if you have truly changed, if you have done the work, we will see." His voice was barely a whisper. "Will you let me?" Vanessa replied, "I do not know. That is a question for the Vanessa who exists 6 years from now. The Vanessa sitting here today just wanted you to see your daughter, even if it is only in pictures." She stood up to go. "Vanessa!" he called out, his voice cracking with emotion. "I am sorry. I know those words do not fix a single thing, but I am truly sorry." "I know you are," she said softly, "but sorry does not raise a child. Goodbye, David." She left the room without a second glance. That part of her life was finally over. Spring arrived in Atlanta, bringing with it fresh flowers and the sound of birdsong. Vanessa pushed a stroller along a path in Oakland Cemetery. Little Grace walked beside her, taking wobbly, determined steps. They found Margaret's grave, and Vanessa laid out a blanket. She sat down with Grace, who immediately started exploring the grass and flowers with the focus only a toddler can have. "Hey, Mom," Vanessa said quietly. "It has been a little while." She carefully arranged a bouquet of fresh flowers in the vase on the headstone. "The foundation just opened its 4th shelter last month. Sarah is in charge of all operations now. She is incredible at her job. We have now helped over 2,000 families." Grace babbled happily as she pulled at a blade of grass. Grace is walking now. Well, mostly wobbling. She is incredibly determined, though. I wonder who she gets that from. Vanessa paused, feeling a wave of emotion. David is in prison. He sends letters, but I do not write back. Maybe one day Grace will want to get to know him. That will be her decision to make. Grace toddled over to the gravestone and touched the cool stone with her tiny hands. "I wanted to tell you something," Vanessa continued. "I am not angry any longer. I always thought that winning would feel like a great victory, but really, it just feels like peace. It feels like I can finally breathe." She watched her daughter explore the world without any fear. "You gave me so much more than money, Mom. You gave me proof that I was worth protecting. You proved that Grace was worth fighting for." Her voice trembled slightly. "I miss you every single day. I wish you could be here to see her. I wish you could see everything that we have built." Just then, Grace toddled back and fell into Vanessa's lap, giggling. "Say hi to Grandma Margaret," Vanessa whispered. Grace waved her tiny hand at the gravestone and then looked right at Vanessa. "Mama," she said, her first word spoken with perfect clarity. Vanessa froze, tears of pure joy streaming down her face. "Yes, baby. Mama. I am your mama." She hugged Grace tightly. "And Grandma Margaret is watching over both of us." The second annual Margaret Lawson Foundation Gala was a very different event from the first. It was a smaller, more personal gathering. with 200 guests instead of 800. The women and children the foundation had helped were the guests of honor. Their real faces and real stories of survival were the focus of the night. Vanessa walked onto the stage, filled with a confidence that had been forged in fire. Grace was backstage with Sarah, her image projected on a monitor. It was a deliberate echo of the first gala, but this time it was a symbol of joy, not a demand for proof. Last year, Vanessa began, we hosted a gala that became famous for all the wrong reasons. Tonight, I hope we become famous for all the right reasons. The crowd laughed, a warm and genuine sound. The Margaret Lawson Foundation has helped 21 families this year. We have opened 4 shelters and 3 legal clinics. We have provided education grants for 300 women who are rebuilding their lives. The screen behind her showed the faces of real people, not celebrities. It showed women who had found freedom from abuse and children who had found a safe place to live. These were families who had been given a chance to start over. My mother taught me that true power is not about being seen by everyone. It is about being ready. But she also taught me that after you fight, you must build. After you win, you must heal. And after you survive, you must help others survive. She lifted her glass. To Margaret Lawson, who taught me that the best revenge is not about destroying your enemies. It is about building something so beautiful and strong that they can never touch it. The applause was deep and heartfelt. This night was not about scandal or drama. It was about the important work that was continuing, growing, and making a real difference in people's lives. Later that night, Vanessa carried a sleeping Grace up the stairs to her nursery. She gently placed her daughter into her crib. She covered her with a soft blanket. On the wall were framed pictures of 3 generations of strong women. Margaret holding a baby Vanessa, and Vanessa holding a baby Grace. It was a legacy of strength, passed down from mother to daughter, and then to granddaughter. Vanessa gently touched each photograph. We did it, Mom. We are safe. We are strong. We are using your gift exactly the way you wanted us to. She walked over to the window and looked out over the large estate. The city lights twinkled in the distance. Her mother's voice seemed to echo in her mind, words she remembered from letters, from memories, from a lifetime of lessons. My darling girl, if you are hearing this, it means you survived. You fought and you won. Now the truly hard part begins, learning to live without anger. Do not let power become your cage. Use it to build something beautiful. Show Grace what true strength looks like. I love you more than words can say. I am so incredibly proud of the woman you have become. Vanessa closed her eyes, and a single tear escaped. It was a tear of release, not of pain. She opened her eyes and looked at Grace one last time. Her daughter was sleeping soundly. Completely unaware of the battles that had been fought to protect her, she did not know about the empire that was built to secure her future, or about the grandmother who had planned for every possibility. Okay, Mom, Vanessa whispered. I am ready. She turned off the light and walked down the hallway with a confident stride. She was not running from anything anymore. She was not fighting ghosts from her past. She was simply living, building, and being the mother, the philanthropist, and the strong woman Margaret had raised her to be. For a moment, the camera of her mind lingered on the nursery door, then on Margaret's photo, whose eyes seemed to hold a knowing look, a look of approval for how everything had turned out. Grace Lawson, now 7 years old, sat in her mother's library doing her homework. Math problems were spread out on the table in front of her, but she kept looking up at a photograph on the wall. It was a black and white portrait of a woman she had never met, but somehow she felt like she knew her. Mama, she asked, tell me the story about Grandma Margaret again. Vanessa looked up from her laptop, where she had been reviewing proposals for the foundation. She smiled, closed the computer, and came to sit beside her daughter. "Your grandmother," she began, "was the smartest person I have ever known." She understood something very important. She knew that being underestimated is a gift, not an insult. Grace looked confused. "What does underestimated mean?" "It means that people do not think you can do something," Vanessa explained. "They think you are not smart enough, or strong enough, or good enough." Vanessa gently tucked a piece of Grace's hair behind her ear. "Your grandmother let people think that about her, and while they were busy, not paying attention, she built an entire empire." Grace's eyes widened. "Like a princess?" Vanessa smiled. "Even better than a princess. She was like a queen who built her own kingdom instead of being given one." Grace thought about this for a moment. "Is that why we have the foundation? Because of what Grandma built?" "That is exactly right," Vanessa said. "She built it so that we could help people who are going through difficult times. We help them so they do not have to fight their battles all by themselves. It is like how Uncle James and Aunt Catherine helped you." Vanessa smiled at the mention of their names. James Morrison and Catherine Blake had become like family. They were an honorary uncle and aunt who had stood by them through the worst of it. "Yes," Grace said, "and like how Aunt Sarah helps you." When people feel all alone and scared, having someone who believes in them can change their whole world. Grace then turned back to her math problems, working on them with a determined focus. That look of concentration reminded Vanessa so much of Margaret that it brought a happy ache to her heart. The Margaret Lawson Foundation had grown far beyond anything Vanessa had ever dreamed. It now had 7 shelters in 3 different states. There were legal clinics in 5 cities. The education programs had helped over 500 women finish their degrees and get certifications. The foundation was now a model for others. It was a blueprint showing how inherited money could be used to create real, lasting change. Sarah Mitchell was indeed the chief operating officer now. She had left her nursing career to run the foundation full-time, and she was absolutely brilliant at it. She brought a perfect mix of kindness and sharp organizational skills that made everything run perfectly. Detective Michael Rivera had been promoted to captain. He still dropped by every now and then to check on them. He was not there as an investigator anymore, but as a friend who had seen them through their darkest days. Catherine Blake continued to manage the investment portfolio with the same strategic genius that Margaret had possessed. The original $500 million had grown to over $700 million through her careful guidance. This growth generated even more money for the foundation's important work. James Morrison was still their lawyer and trusted advisor. His job had changed from fighting legal battles to managing the estate and the foundation's governance. He was in his mid-60s now and was starting to think about retirement. But he was not quite ready to leave the family he had worked so hard to protect. The Reynolds family, on the other hand, had fallen apart. David served 4.5 years in prison before he was released for good behavior. He now worked in a warehouse. He attended mandatory therapy sessions and paid his child support on time. Vanessa deposited that money directly into a special trust fund she had set up for Grace. For years, he sent countless letters. Vanessa kept every single one, but never sent a reply. That chapter of her life was closed, maybe for good. Linda Reynolds was released from prison after serving 6 years. She now lived in a small, lonely apartment. Her son wanted nothing to do with her, blaming her for the family's ruin. The same high society that once adored her now turned its back. Her husband, Robert Reynolds, died of a heart attack 3 years into his own prison sentence. David was permitted to attend the funeral, but he was under guard. Linda went by herself. The powerful family dynasty had completely collapsed into dust. Claudia Bennington served 3 years in prison, then vanished with a new identity. Detective Rivera would sometimes hear whispers of new schemes that sounded like her work. She had clearly learned to be more cautious. But some people are who they are. Judge Patricia Morgan was disbarred. She found herself buried in civil lawsuits from the families whose lives she had ruined. Her name was now a symbol of corruption. Justice had been slow, but it had finally arrived. On Grace's 7th birthday, Vanessa took her to the cemetery. It was not a sad occasion, but a special tradition they had created together. They brought flowers and shared stories to keep Margaret's memory vibrant and alive. Grace, full of boundless energy, raced ahead to the gravesite. She carefully placed a bouquet of bright sunflowers against the stone. "Hi, Grandma Margaret. I am 7 today. Mommy says 7 is a very lucky number." Vanessa arrived a moment later, carrying a blanket and a picnic basket. They settled on the grass next to the grave, eating sandwiches and birthday cake, talking about little things and big things. "Mommy, do you think Grandma Margaret is proud of me?" Vanessa hugged Grace tightly. "I know she is. She would be so proud of how clever you are, and how kind you are, and how much you care for people who need a little help." "Like the children at our shelter?" Grace asked. "Exactly like them," Vanessa confirmed. Grace was silent for a moment, and then she said something that truly touched Vanessa's heart. "When I grow up, I want to help people just like you and Grandma Margaret. I want to make sure no one ever feels all alone when something bad happens." Tears welled up in Vanessa's eyes. "Then that is exactly what you will do." 3 generations of Lawson women. Margaret laid the groundwork, Vanessa protected and grew it. And now Grace would carry that legacy forward, not because she had to, but because of a true desire to continue the important work. That evening, they had a small birthday party back at the estate. Sarah came with her girlfriend of 2 years, a happy relationship that warmed Vanessa's heart after everything Sarah had done for her. James and Catherine arrived with presents. Detective Rivera even stopped by with his family. Other friends from the foundation, from Grace's school, and from the new community they had built all came to celebrate. As the party quieted down and the guests began to leave, Grace fell asleep on the sofa. Tired out from all the fun, Vanessa carried her upstairs and tucked her into bed. She stood there for a moment, just looking at her daughter's calm and peaceful face. She thought back to the woman she had been 7 years ago. She was pregnant, grieving, and felt completely betrayed. She stood at her mother's grave while her husband tried to destroy her life. That version of herself had been so lost and broken. She was sure that all the good in her life was gone forever. She could never have pictured this future, the strength she would discover, the empire she would command, the justice she would win, the foundation she would create, and the daughter she would raise to be confident and caring. But her mother, Margaret, had pictured it. She had planned for it all. Margaret had prepared every single tool Vanessa would need and left behind clear instructions. "Thank you, Mom," Vanessa whispered into the quiet room, "for everything, for seeing the future I could not see, for believing I was strong enough when I did not believe in myself, for teaching me that patience is a superpower and that the greatest revenge is to build a beautiful life." She started to leave, but then paused. There was one more thing that needed to be said. "And thank you for Grace. Thank you for giving me a reason to keep fighting when I just wanted to quit. Thank you for making sure your granddaughter would grow up feeling safe, loved, and strong." The house grew quiet as night settled in. Vanessa went downstairs to the library, made herself a cup of tea, and sat at her mother's desk. It was the very same desk where she had discovered the first letter, the one that held the key to understanding everything. On the desk was a new letter, one she was writing to Grace. It was meant to be opened on her daughter's 18th birthday. Vanessa picked up her pen to continue writing. My dearest Grace, if you are reading this, you are starting your own journey as an adult. By now, you know the full story of your grandmother, Margaret, and how she secretly built an empire, and how she used that empire to protect me when I needed it more than anything. But what you might not fully grasp yet is the most important lesson she ever taught me. A lesson I now hope to pass on to you. Wealth is not about the amount of money you have. Power is not about how many people you can control, and success is not about defeating your enemies. The real way to measure a good life is by how many people are better off simply because you were here. It is about how many lives you improved and how much darkness you were able to turn into light. Your grandmother did not build a fortune just for the sake of being rich. She built it to be a shield for the people she loved and a helping hand for those in need. She did it to prove that a woman everyone dismissed as a simple bookkeeper could actually change the world. I was given her fortune, but more importantly, I was given her mission. And now, I am passing both of them to you. This is not a weight on your shoulders, but a world of opportunity. You do not have to run the foundation if that is not your dream. You can be anyone and do anything you want. Your inheritance gives you that freedom, but I really, really hope that you will choose to carry on this work, not out of duty, but because you understand. As your grandmother and I came to understand, protecting and empowering other people is the most noble purpose a person can have. I want you to always remember 3 things. First, being underestimated is your secret advantage. Let people look down on you. Then, you can prove them all wrong by achieving more than they could ever imagine. Second, patience is your most powerful weapon. Never act out of pure anger. Instead, make a plan, prepare yourself, and strike only when the moment is perfect, not when your emotions tell you to. Third, the absolute best revenge is to build something so beautiful, so good, and so meaningful that your enemies see that they only destroyed themselves when they underestimated you. You are my greatest source of joy, Grace. Watching you become such a thoughtful, kind, and brilliant young woman has been the greatest honor of my life. No matter what you decide to do or where your life's journey takes you, please know that both of your grandmothers are so proud of you. Margaret, who you never had the chance to meet, loved you so much that she planned for your future before you were even born. And me, I am the lucky one who gets to watch you become the amazing person I always knew you would be. The women of the Lawson family are strong. We endure, we survive, and we thrive. We never, ever let them keep us down. All my love, forever and always, Mom. Vanessa put the pen down, sealed the envelope, and placed the letter in the safe. It would wait there for Grace's 18th birthday. She turned off the lights in the library and walked through the quiet house one last time, checking the locks and turning off lamps, getting ready for the next day. Tomorrow, she had a meeting with investors who were interested in taking the foundation global. The day after that, there was a board meeting to get approval for 3 new shelter locations. Next week, she was scheduled to give a speech at a conference on empowering women who have survived trauma. The work never stopped. It was Margaret's work, passed to Vanessa, and soon to be passed to Grace. It was a legacy not of getting even, but of being resilient. It was not about destruction, but about creation. It was not about holding on to bitterness, but about transformation. Vanessa stopped in front of the portrait of Margaret that hung in the hallway. Her mother's painted eyes seemed to gaze at her with pride, with love, and with the deep satisfaction of a job well done. We are okay, Mom. We are more than okay. We are exactly the women you raised us to be. She went up the stairs and checked on Grace one final time. Her daughter was sleeping soundly, completely safe, in a home that was built by her grandmother's brilliance and her mother's bravery. And so, Vanessa Lawson, who was once shattered by a graveside, who was once left with only her grief and a sense of betrayal, went to sleep in a home that was now filled with love. She was surrounded by proof that strength can be passed down, that justice can be achieved, and that a woman who is underestimated is the most powerful force on earth. The story that had started in ashes and ended in an empire was finally complete. But the legacy, the true legacy, would now continue for many generations to come.